Hey everyone, welcome back to Budget Gaming with Chasm, where I show you guys that you don't need to spend $3,000 to play today's most popular games. And the computer I'm going to show you guys today, you can build for under $200 yourself, and it has massive upgrade potential for when you have more money in the future. And yes, it does have an actual $10 graphics card and $20 to $25 processor inside it. But what actually are they? Well, this right here is the R9 380. Now, I was scrolling on Facebook Marketplace, as one does, and I saw this baby right here for $10. And I knew I had to jump on it because these regularly go for $40 to $60 on eBay. So I knew this was a steal, and I picked it up the same day. But what actually is it? Well, the Radeon R9 380 was released by AMD on June 18th, 2015, which makes it almost 11 years old now. But don't let that discourage you. This thing still has some potential. The AMD Radeon R9 380 has 1,792 cores, 112 TMUs, 32 ROPs, either 2 gigabytes or 4 gigabytes of GDDR5, and its performance is relatively similar to a GTX 1050 Ti, but it draws significantly more power at 190 watts. What makes this version so special right here is that it's the 4 gigabyte version, not the 2 gigabytes, which makes it way better in 2026, where 4 gigabytes is the bare minimum, if not below the bare minimum, to run AAA titles. And the 2 gigabyte version is, frankly, completely obsolete. It's also factory overclocked, and of course it has RGB, which immediately makes it better than a 5090. No, I'm just kidding. But it is a cool feature. For the rest of this build, I'm going to be using a Ryzen 5 2600, which is $20 to $25 used, a Gigabyte B450 motherboard, which is about $50 to $70 used, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 megahertz, which used to be about $30 used, but is now about $40 to $75 used, and a old Fantex case, which should be anywhere from $20 to $40, and a 650 watt power supply, which you should be able to find for $50 to $65. All this, if you find good deals, should put you in the realm of a little under $200 to $250, including the $10 graphics card if you can find it for a similar price. Now it's time to see how these components actually perform in games. I've tested a couple easier to run esports titles, as well as a couple AAA titles, newer and older, to really get a picture of how this thing performed back in the day, as well as in some newer titles. Now let's get on to the benchmarks. Starting with a game that released the same year as this graphics card, 2015's Rise of the Tomb Raider performs pretty well on high settings, getting an average of 51.72 FPS overall. In certain parts, it reaches nearly 60 FPS, while in other parts, it goes down to 48 and 46 FPS, respectively. This is certainly a playable experience. However, if you want closer to 60 FPS average throughout the whole game, you're going to need to drop to medium settings. While watching the benchmarks for this video, please keep in mind that this was recorded at 30 FPS on a low CPU usage preset in OBS Studio, so don't refer to the actual smoothness of the footage for the experience. Refer to the average FPS counter and the 1% lows, as well as my commentary, to figure out how your experience would be in these games. Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p native with the low preset runs, but it's not what I would consider playable, with frame rates dipping into the low 20s. While you might be able to technically play the game on this, you're going to have a difficult time and I would not recommend it. Changing the settings to their respective lowest and changing FSR to balanced will provide a much more playable result, with the average FPS being 39.9 instead of 29.3. With the minimum FPS being 29, this is a much more playable experience, and while it doesn't look great, it's definitely a playable experience that you could enjoy the storyline in the game. Also, I did test 1080p native with all low settings as opposed to just the low preset that I did first, but it only returned an average of about 32 FPS and the minimum FPS was still well below 30, so I would recommend sticking to FSR balanced and all low settings if you want to play this game on the R9 380. Far Cry 4 is still the best looking game in the Far Cry series in my opinion, but despite that it still runs very well on the R9 380 with an average of 67 FPS in this beginning area of the game at very high settings. This could drop later in the game, especially if you don't have a stronger CPU than this, as this game is surprisingly CPU intensive. However, you can always just drop it to high settings if drops do occur. But overall, I think on very high settings, this would be a great experience to play this game through. I decided to test Bloons Tower Defense 6 just to see how it would run, and just like I expected, it ran absolutely flawlessly. This game is locked to the refresh rate of your monitor, and this one was 144, so rock solid 144. No drops below 100, so very good experience playing Bloons Tower Defense 6 and any other Bloons game. Fortnite will give you a warning when you open the game that your drivers are not updated for DirectX 12. However, this isn't actually an error, and at least as far as I could tell, the game will run perfectly fine. You can't update the drivers any more than the last drivers that are available, so you're just going to have to live with this message. At 1080p native using the DX12 performance mode rendering API and all low settings, the game runs very well in creative with an average of about 190 FPS. As for Battle Royale, it's still a very playable experience with an average of about 125 FPS. However, Fortnite is a very CPU bound game, more so than almost any other game I've tested, especially one that's supposedly this easy to run. And because of that, we did see dips and drops down to the 1% lows of about 24 to 29 FPS. Now don't get me wrong, this game is still very playable and you can definitely run it and have fun with your friends. However, for Fortnite in particular, the Ryzen 5 2600 is actually not a super strong CPU, and I would not recommend this CPU or this graphics card for anything related to competitive play. But for just playing zero build or regular build modes with your friends, or even ranked modes, this is a very good computer. For that still, you're not going to really drop below 100 FPS apart from a couple stutters. Counter-Strike 2 was a little disappointing, to be honest. First of all, I was unable to use MSI Afterburner in Counter-Strike 2 for some reason. And then also, it only got around 100 FPS average, and I saw it drop very often into the 80s, 70s, even the 60s sometimes. And this is on 1080p native low settings. And I believe it was mostly GPU limited, so if you are going to get this set up and use it to play CS2, I would recommend using a resolution like 1280 by 960, 1024 by 768, or 1280 by 720 for the best experience playing this game. If you use a lower resolution, it should get over 120 FPS most of the time, and that would be, in my opinion, very playable. It is still playable, but that would be, better for flicking and stuff like that. But overall, decent experience. Just wish it was a bit better. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds runs very well with a 84 FPS average and 41 FPS 1% lows. I've never played this game before, so forgive my gameplay. But yeah, the game runs very well. Utilizes under 3 gigabytes of VRAM, and while both the CPU and graphics card are very highly utilized, it tends to be more GPU limited. But they are a very good match for this game, and it felt very smooth, smoother than Counter-Strike 2 in my opinion. And yeah, if you guys have this combination or you are looking to get it, then you can play PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. Very good experience. And I mean, the game doesn't look great. I mean, it looks pretty bad, to be honest. But, it's not meant to be the most realistic looking game of all time. So, I think it's a great experience, especially if you're just having fun playing with your friends. You can definitely play this game. Where Winds Meet was released in November 2025, making it by far the most recent game that I'm testing today. And well, it started up and it ran about as well as I expected it to, which is a very good showing from this card considering that drivers were deprecated for this card about 5 years ago. But as you can see, it's not the best experience. I'm playing at 720p on the lowest settings, and even though it says it's at native, I see like this weird FSR, TSR artifacting on the screen. I'm not totally sure why this is. Maybe there's an anti-aliasing option that you can turn off or something like that. If it's TSR, then maybe turning it off would make it run a little better. But yeah, it looks good when you're standing still. When you're moving, it's not the best, but it's definitely playable, and you could definitely have fun playing this game. I know it's very popular right now, but you could also turn it up to 1080p, but then you might be dipping into the 20s. If you do have to play this game on an R9 380, I would recommend these settings. 720p lowest, maybe 900p. But yeah, game from almost 2026, still playable on the R9 380. Metro Exodus defaulted to the ultra settings with physics and hairworks turned on. So that's what I tried it on first, and as you can clearly see, that was not a great idea. We got about an average of 20 FPS with dips into the single digits. So I promptly turned it down to medium settings with hairworks and physics off. I still kept tessellation on though because, you know, it makes the game really look a lot better. And as you can see, the results were significantly more effective. You can see that we were getting an average of about 40 FPS. I actually forgot the frame counter for this one, unfortunately. But yeah, at about 40 FPS, can drop into the low 30s at times and go up into the 50s. But this is how I would play the game personally on this system. Definitely a playable experience. Because it is an older card, I also tried it on DirectX 11, thinking that maybe it would help us get better frames, but no, it's about the same, maybe even slightly worse on DirectX 11, which actually makes sense because this generation of cards really loves early DirectX 12, more so than DirectX 11. The R9 380, R9 290, cards like that really love games from the late 2010s that use the first version of DirectX 12. Well, what's my final verdict on the R9 380? Well, it's still a good card, it still runs most games. However, when you compare it to cards like the GTX 1060, which is about 50% more powerful, and the GTX 1050 Ti, which has similar power, but runs solely off of the PCI slot, not needing a second power connector, I feel like this card has kind of lost its place, unless you can find it for a really good deal like I did. If you can find it for $10 or $20, then go ahead and pick it up, and you can put more money into the rest of the components. But don't go and buy this for $40, $50, because you can get a GTX 1060 for the same price, which has more VRAM and much more performance. But what about the rest of the system? Well, I think that's a bit of a different story. For the Ryzen 5 2600, I think it's still a very capable CPU in 2026. A lot of people talk smack about it, and don't get me wrong, you're not going to win any Fortnite or Counter-Strike tournaments on it. But I think just for playing with your friends at 60 to 120 FPS in AAA and competitive games, it is a great option, especially for how cheap it is. I mean, you can get one for $20 to $25, get a cheap AM4 motherboard for $40 to $50, and $60 to $80, you're all set for your CPU and your motherboard. Get some cheap RAM and a graphics card like this and the rest of the components, and you could be up and running for $200 to $300 on a gaming system that you can play all your games with your friends. And you don't have to pay for PlayStation Plus or Xbox Live Gold or anything like that. So I think that I could highly recommend the Ryzen 5 2600 on the low-end budget spectrum. And as for the R9 380, I wouldn't recommend it, but if you already have it or you're planning to get it, as long as it's $20 or less and the 4 gig version, you're still getting a pretty good deal. But I think that's everything. I have more graphics cards that I'm going to test, so put down in the comments whether you want me to test a GTX 1060 next, RTX 3060 next, or RX 6800 next. I have all of those and I can test any one of them, so go in the comments right now. Let me know which one you guys want me to test next. But other than that, that's everything. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.